Welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you'll know when new videos are available. I really hope you enjoy this one. What I want to do is really what I'm using the idea of looking at the listing agreement again, because we haven't done it for 6 months or so, is really just because of interactions I've been having with agents here in the office. And I'm assuming that other agents out there that are either watching this or on the class that haven't had a listing yet still have the same questions. I get phone calls and conversations on a daily basis about the way the commission is structured in the listing agreement. So I'm going to use just us going through the listing agreement, which should only take us a day, to talk about that, and also to talk about how to handle when your listing is not going to start marketing, when it's not going to go active or coming soon within that 2-day period after you take in the listing. We're going to talk about that and what the, proper steps are contractually for you to make sure that you're in compliance, because the last thing you want is to be out of compliance with the CRMLS when it comes to your listing, because that's potentially a minimum $2,500 fine that is, not, you can't appeal that. You're going to be forced to pay it. So let's go ahead and get started. There is a question that about the BRBC here. It only has space for 2. What if there are 3 buyers? Because you can't put 3 names in there, you're going to have to do 2 separate BRBCs right now. One with 2 buyers on it and one with the third. It's really the only way to do it. If they were to expand that and maybe in an update, and those updates usually come around June, July, I would assume that we're probably going to see some updates soon. I think they'll add multiple buyers on there like they have for the purchase agreements. So, okay, let us share our screen and we will jump right in. As I like to do every time we start a new form, the first place we start is the disclosure regarding agency relationships. And again, when you're taking a listing, this generally isn't an issue, other than even if I don't get the listing agreement signed, I technically am supposed to have one of these. And I know that the majority of us wouldn't have this if we didn't get the listing agreement signed, and we wouldn't expect that anybody would be asking for it. But legally, the Department of Real Estate, because this is a Department of Real Estate requirement, they could ask for a disclosure regarding agency relationships, even if you don't ultimately end up having the agent seller relationship or the agent buyer relationship. So just keep that in mind. This is required for any discussion about real estate, and really what it does is it discloses to the buyer or seller, and in this case seller, because we're looking at a listing agreement, how they can be represented by an agent and what that fiduciary duty is. Okay, so this is all it is a disclosure. And I think part of the thing is that we have to realize that there's still times where I hear agents that are struggling with this, where they feel like somehow this creates the relationship between them and their client, and that's not the case. Okay, so we've got to, part of us being great professional agents is understanding how all of these documents actually work, because when we don't, it makes us unsure, and then when we're unsure, then our clients are extremely unsure. So it's our confidence and professionalism helps us to have better relationships with the clients. So this is where the beginning is this is how we explain those relationships that are possible in any real estate transaction. right? So first off is the seller's agent, right? Or we would be representing them as the seller. The second is the buyer's agent, right? That's if we were representing the buyer. And then the third is agent representing both buyer and seller, which would then constitute dual agency. And in the place of dual agency, I have to get your permission to act in that capacity. And there's another form, and that'll be the next form we'll go over, that we have to have signed that gives us the permission to act in that capacity. Now, dual agency isn't reserved to me as listing agent and me as buyer's agent. It is anybody that is under the same umbrella brokerage, right? So anybody in this office, anybody who's an agent for Century 21 All Stars, if Abel has a listing and then Araceli has a buyer, that's still dual agency. And so if we don't explain dual agency properly to our sellers and to our buyers, and they're adamant on the fact that they don't want dual agency, well, then both buyer or seller is wiping out the ability for us to have any kind of relationship or negotiating power by working within the office. So again, understanding what dual agency means, explaining that exactly to them how it works, and showing them the benefit of them approving for us to act as a dual agent. Okay. And that's all this form states. That's it. It's not a commitment. It is not a promise. It is just, I am telling you how this works. I want you to understand how it works. And that's it. And once one of these is signed, that's all you need. So let's say, for example, if I have this signed by my seller, right? And then they're buying a replacement property, technically, I don't need another one. I know that another one's going to come out with the purchase agreement. You don't need it. You've already explained your relationships, how they work. Okay. So just understand that. Any questions about the disclosure regarding agency relationships? You guys can raise your hand or type it in the chat. But anybody have any questions about the disclosure regarding agency relationships? Super simple. Have to have it. It's required. And again, once I start working with a client, I only need to have one. That's it. Okay. All right. Let's move on. So the next form. Oh, the PRBS is not in here. The PRBS, which is the possible representation of more than one buyer or seller, and it'll come with your purchase agreement. That's the one that is the disclosure of how the market works and their consent for you to act as a dual agent. So just make sure you have the PRBS signed by your sellers. Okay. All right. So let's look at the listing agreement now. Listing agreement, date prepared, pretty straightforward. If I'm writing it today, today is the date prepared. Okay. The seller, let's say, is John Smith for now, just so we have something in there that only allows for 2 sellers. So if there's not enough room, right, then for extra sellers, we could move some stuff in there, but we're going to probably have to have some, squeeze some things in there, but we're going to have an additional signature addendum for the listing agreement. Remember, exclusive right to sell. Make sure it's the seller's legal names. I don't like that it's not capital. It's bugging me. Make sure it's the legal names. If this is a trust, right? This is the John Smith Family Irrevocable Trust. If that's the name of the trust, that's the name of the seller. That's not who's going to sign it, but that could be the name of the seller. So remember, entities can also be sellers, just like when we talked about the RPA, that an entity is technically the buyer's name, and those are the things that go in there. So just make sure that you have the legal correct name for who is the seller. It's whatever shows on title, that should be what it is. If the seller is asking you to do something other than what's on title, that's not the right way to do it. And this is the right way to do it. The correct name as what shows on title. Look at that. Bring that up. You guys should have it because you should have had a property profile already done to do your listing presentation. So that shouldn't be an issue. So you got the names in there. Okay. The address. First is the broker. And obviously for us, that's going to be Century 21 All Stars. The address, again, we'll just use the office because it's easier than, right? So we'll do Telegraph Road, and that's in the city of Pico and the county of Los Angeles. And zip code. Make sure this stuff is complete. The parcel number, The parcel number, again, like I've said with the purchase agreements, is not super important as long as we have a physical address, unless that physical address that we're looking at is multiple parcels, right, that are included. Sometimes then you don't want to include those parcels. Marisol had her hand up, so go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Kyle. So I have a question. If it's an LLC or a corporation, how do I write it here? Because sometimes there's somebody signing on behalf of that corporation, which is
But that has nothing to do with how you write it here. You're going to write it here, whatever the name of the corporation is. The signature is handled separately, and especially down at the bottom of the listing, when we get the signatures, you'll be able to see how that happens for an entity seller. Okay.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, moving on. So, like I was saying, the parcel number is not necessarily a super important thing. If you need to put, if you want to put it in, but make sure it's correct. If there's multiple parcels, make sure those are there. Okay, so that's it for that top section. Paragraph 2. Now, these are the terms of the listing agreement. This is what the seller is agreeing to with you, the broker. Okay, the listing period, beginning date. I would always, regardless of when your seller says to you that they want to start marketing the property, my start date for this listing is always the day that I'm meeting with the seller. Okay. Or I would do it as, if I'm writing the listing today, I would assume that my appointment is today. Unless I'm writing it today and my appointment's tomorrow, whatever it is, whatever day my appointment is, that's the beginning date of it. So let's assume that it's today. Okay. I'm going to do at a minimum a 6-month listing, probably going to do a year just to give yourself plenty of time, right? So we're going to go to April 3rd of next year, but a minimum 6 months. Look, right now, days on market for most of our areas are 30 plus. And especially if I'm taking an overpriced listing, I'm going to increase the amount of time that I have the listing for. Plus, I want to make sure that that listing period exceeds even a close of escrow period. Okay. So at a minimum 3 months, I'm just throwing up, 6 months, I'm just throwing up a year here. But if you read below, it says not to exceed 24 months. If it's 1 to 4 units, not more than 24 months, and it's not owned by an entity. Now, in this case, because this is an entity that owns it, or like an LLC, okay, you can exceed the 24 months. If it's an LLC, like Marisol was asking about, you can exceed that 24-month period. That 24-month period is a protection for independent homeowners that, generally really live in their house, but anybody that's a homeowner that's not an entity, right? So if you own it as an individual, you have the absolute right to that maximum listing period of time of 24 months. Somebody can't lock you in more than that. Okay. So for the majority of you guys, your listing period is going to not exceed 24 months. I don't think anybody's going to go take a 24-month listing. If I'm completely honest, I don't see any reason for it. But if it is an LLC, you can't exceed that. Okay. Listing price. I suggest that you always show up at your listing appointment with your suggested price typed in. So if my suggested price for this property is $1 million, right? If I suggest that $1 million is what I think when I did my comps and I put together my listing presentation, if I think $1 million is the right price, I'm going to put it in. I don't like the tactic of showing up at a listing appointment with this blank. It defeats the purpose of you guys going into the listing appointment with a suggested price, because if you were firm on the price, you'd have it written in. Now, if you choose to change the price based on the conversations that you have with the seller, or maybe the condition of the property is not what you expected it to be, and when you get there, you're like, hey, this is worth more, then all you have to do is cross out that number, write in the new number, and make sure when your seller signs, they initial right next to it. That's it. So suggestion, go in with the price that you want to list the property for and use that as part of your presentation. Like, look, I've already decided this is what we're going to sell for. If you want to change it, then we change it. I just don't like that kind of unsure, wishy-washy, blank list price. And not only that, there's been plenty of times where agents have signed listing agreements and forgotten, even if they've discussed the price with the seller, and not put a price in there. And if there's no price in that listing agreement, it is unenforceable. If there is no beginner end date with this listing agreement, it is unenforceable. Okay. Now, I did mention, I kind of skipped over it. The start date, I want the start date of the listing to be the day that I have the listing appointment. I'm assuming I'm going to get it. If we're going to market it later, I'm going to show you later on if you need to delay the marketing, not put it as active or coming soon. I'm going to show you where to do that. Okay. I'm going to show you where that happens in a different form called the MLSA. Okay. Let's see. Alba had her hand up. Go ahead, Alba.
Hi, Kyle. Thank you. If it's a listing agreement through Zoom and they decide on the price, will we have to write a whole different new listing agreement for the new price, or how would that work?
If you're doing your appointment through Zoom, I'm assuming that you've already sent them the listing agreement through DocuSign. If you've sent it through DocuSign prior to your appointment, or you're sending it through DocuSign after, then you would just have to go into your DocuSign and make an adjustment or change the listing agreement before you send out the DocuSign.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let's see right here. Let's see. Do we have to write the words 1 million? Well, as you saw before, I didn't write the words 1 million. I put in the price here and it writes it for you. So if though you change the price, yeah, you should change this price so that it matches. Absolutely. If the property is a trust and there is one minor, can the mom sign the listing agreement to sell the property? Well, that does. First of all, a minor can't. So if the minor is the successor trustee or the trustee of the trust, there's a problem already with how that trust was set up. You'd have to look at the trust, see what the trust dictates as far as powers of attorney or minor trustees. Most of the time, trustees on a trust are not minors. So that seems odd that somebody would have to have that set up. So it depends. If they set up a trust where a trustee was a minor, then there should be some kind of provision for a power of attorney. You'd still have to have a power of attorney for the mother and the son or the child, whoever the minor was. I think that's something that we should probably talk about later. Any other questions? Okay. If the property is a manufactured home or a probate, you want to make sure you check off either of these two boxes because it'll add in an addendum for mobile homes, manufactured homes, and for probates. Okay. All right. Let's see. Okay. Now, here's where we get to the problem with compensation. Okay. This compensation in paragraph 2C1 is only the compensation the seller is paying you to act as listing agent. So I'm going to repeat that. All of this compensation in C, C1, C2, all of the C3, the continuation, all of this is only compensation that the seller is paying you as the listing agent. It has absolutely nothing, zero, to do with compensation for a buyer's brokerage. Even if that buyer's brokerage is you, like you're going to double end, it doesn't matter. This has nothing to do with buyer's compensation, period, end of story. So the first part up here, and I saw your comment about the manufactured home. Yes, I'll click on that after we finish this since I already moved on to the thought. Paragraph 2C1, compensation to seller's broker, the percent of listing price and if any. So if you're going to add anything in there, like maybe transaction coordinator fee or something else, that would be if any, you would put the amount. Or if you're charging a flat rate, you would check off this box and put the flat rate amount that you're charging. But this percentage, whether it be 3%, 2%, 8%, I don't care. Whatever you write in there is solely what they're going to pay you for selling their house. So if you go into a listing appointment and you have a 6 here and you're communicating to the seller that 6% is because you have to pay 3% to a buyer's agent, you're lying to the seller, and the seller is overpaying because there's still going to be a separate compensation that's going to be negotiated in the purchase agreement. So understand, you can charge 6 as long as your seller is fully aware that 6% is getting paid to you for selling the property, whether or not they pay compensation to a buyer's agent, because that is negotiated separately. Does everyone understand that? Any questions about that? Anybody have any confusion about that? Is there any question about that? Is there any concerns about that? Whatever you can negotiate here is for you. C2. C2 is exactly what it reads. Additional compensation to seller's broker if buyer is unrepresented. That means, and it says right on here, does not apply to dual agency. That's why it blows my mind when people come to me and say, yeah, I put this in here 2% so that I tell them that I'm getting 2% when I represent the buyer. Has nothing to do with dual agency. An unrepresented buyer would be a buyer that wanted to write an offer on the property, does not have money for compensation, to pay compensation to a buyer's broker. Okay. They don't have any money to pay compensation. They're not going to pay compensation even if they did have the money. And they say, I still want to buy this house, but I don't want to be represented by an agent because I don't want to pay compensation. And your seller says, I don't want you to represent him because I don't want to pay the extra compensation. I'm already paying you this 3%. You can put in here a 1%, a 2% additional fee that they're paying you. 1% seems reasonable for the extra communication that you're going to have with a buyer who does not have an agent, who may not understand the whole process of buying a house. You're not advising them. You're not representing them. As a matter of fact, you're going to have a buyer non-agency agreement signed by these buyers that choose to be unrepresented. And that is the extra compensation your seller's paying you for acting on their behalf as the listing agent for the additional work you may have to do in your communication with a non-represented buyer. Okay. So how do you present compensation to the seller? You're paying me 3% for representing you and your interests. Anybody that writes an offer is probably going to ask you for compensation. That is totally negotiable and up to you to whether you want to pay that or not and the amount that you want to pay. What I would say is the norm that buyers agents are being compensated by sellers in order to have their house be attractive to them is normally 2%. And we can even advertise that in our public advertising, just not on the MLS. So if you choose to pay that, here's what your net sheet looks like. If you choose not to pay it, here's what your net sheet looks like. And then maybe what you'd want to do as part of your listing presentation is show, if we offer compensation, this is what I believe your sales price is going to be and your time on market. Okay. If not, this is what I think your sales price is going to be and time on market. Okay. Those are the kind of things that you want to talk to them about. Okay, so let me go to the hands first, and then I'll go back to these comments. Okay, so Jesus was up first, so go ahead, Jesus.
Yeah, so we're just gonna comment that I don't see anything wrong by us putting the 1% or the 2% in case the buyers doesn't have a representation or doesn't want to be represented. I just feel like you're bringing it up like it's wrong for us to put a 1 or a 2.
No.
Why not?
I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying number one is not going to happen, and number two, most of the time, the agents aren't explaining it correctly that are doing it. Now, if you understand what that means, first of all, to get paid an extra 2% because I might have to have a conversation with somebody sounds ridiculous. But if you can negotiate it and make a seller understand that there's value in it, go for it. Charge them 15%. I don't care. You can charge them as much as you want as long as your seller sees that there's value in the amount that they're paying you. What I'm saying is the chances of you guys doing this, and most agents who are doing it, because I've seen it personally, most agents who are checking this box and putting compensation are telling their sellers, this is for me representing a buyer. 100% of the time, that's what they're doing. And that's not what it means.
And this agent that's not going to be represented and we're going to deal with, is he going to do are we going to do a NAVID? Is he going to do a NAVID? Because it is required for the company for us to do it. Is he going to have
you're not representing them, so you're going to have an avid for your seller, and that's all that's going to be required. You're not going to do anything for these people. You're going to send them whatever documents you would send a listing agent, and they're on their own. So if you were to email all your disclosures to a buyer's agent, that's exactly what you would do to these buyers. Other than the difference with them having an agent and not having an agent is the agent should be explaining the disclosures to them. They're now on their own. You're not going to sit down with them and do disclosures. You're not going to have them do a final walkthrough. All you're going to do is tell them, hey, by the way, your disclosures are due in 2 days. Hey, you have the right to do a final walkthrough 5 days prior to close of escrow. Do you want to go ahead and let us know when you want to do that? That's it. That's all you're going to do. You're not doing anything more.
I'm so interrupt. Yes, I understand. What is the form you have to sign in order to avoid that liability?
The buyer's non-agency. Buyer non-agency. Yeah, you're going to have one of those signed by them.
Okay. They wouldn't have a BRBC.
Why would they have a BRBC? They're not represented by anybody.
Okay. Just checking.
Yeah, they're not represented.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why I'm saying the chances of this of there being a buyer who's not represented are very slim. I know it happens. I get it. It's going to happen. Yes. It's going to happen. The thing is this becomes confusing for you guys, obviously, and for the sellers. And I think that it's as long as you're clear and you can explain to them that this is just for the little bit of extra work. And that's the thing is, if I say this is for the extra work for me communicating and I'm trying to get another 2 or 3% on top of what I'm already getting, it's going to be a harder sell for the sellers. That's all I'm saying is just make sure that it's commensurate, that the amount of compensation that you're looking to charge is commensurate with really the extra work that you're going to do, because you're not actually adding any liability. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you.
Don't try to take advantage. Yeah. Okay. Marisol was next. Go ahead.
All right. So if a buyer is representing themselves, do we have to ask them to fill out like an RPA, the car form RPA, or can they, like, what if they come in with their own?
You can fill out the purchase agreement so you know that it's done the way that that the buyer wants to negotiate it. But that's what why the buyer non-agency comes in, and you're not going to have your name on. There's going to be no agent or brokerage on the buyer's side of it. So you could still write it, but that's why you have the buyer non-agency.
Got it. Okay, and so then on the RPA where it says like that second portion, we don't put anything there, right? Where it says like buyer's agent.
Again, in that section on the purchase agreement where it says buyer's agent, then nothing goes in there.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Let me see some of the stuff in. Edgar asked, what's the industry standard? What are people doing? I don't know I don't know. If you're talking about for non-represented buyers, I don't know what the industry standard is. Teresa, if you're going to charge something for a non-represented buyer, then yes, you have to check that box. Can you leave the section blank and negotiate if you have a buyer who does not have an agent? Yes, of course. You could do a modification of terms afterwards. let's see. I know Marisol did have one where the buyer wasn't, and she had in her listing agreement the 1%, and she got it. So it does happen, but I'm just saying it's not a lot that it's going to happen. But as long as you guys can have the conversation with your sellers and make it clear as to what that 1% actually means, put the 1% in. And I think 1% is fair. Look, Marisol's was on a very expensive listing. So to the 1%, hey, it's, the sellers understood the value of it and they paid it. So that's all I'm saying. As long as you guys can, I'm not saying that you're wrong for putting this. I'm just saying make sure that you're clear on what it is, because I think 90% of the agents aren't. Because I've reviewed listings that have already been signed where people have said, "Oh, I told them that because that's what they were going to pay me if I'm a dual agent." So just keep that in mind. Okay, that's all. Let me answer these two questions where people have their hands raised, and then I'll show you the manufactured home and the probate. Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, Kyle. So just to confirm on C2, this is only towards buyers that approach your listing that do not want to be represented and the seller wants to open escrow with them on being an unrepresented buyer.
Yes.
So and in that case, as a listing agent, how do you put a transaction together where you're not, are you still doing the buyer's paperwork, even though they're
but there's no buyer's paperwork to do. You're going to write the offer and that's it. You're going to have the buyer sign a non-agency agreement that says I'm not represented by Chris Ramos. And then like any other transaction that you do, you forward all the paperwork to the buyer's agent. Now, in this case, you're just going to be sending it directly to the buyers. And if they do their stuff on time or they don't, that's on them.
But is it safe to say, like you said earlier, like the chances of that happening is pretty slim, right?
I would say it's slim. Marisol had this happen to her on her listing that just closed. So, I'm not saying it's never going to happen. I just don't I don't think you're going to see it a lot. I think it would be a really, really savvy buyer who's done this many, many times that knows the process that's going to take the chance to do it that way. For the majority of you guys meeting people at open houses, they're probably not going to be like, no, I'm going to represent myself.
Correct.
So, and if they don't want to represent themselves, then we already know the process for that. They can sign the PSRA or they can sign a BRBC, and then you can negotiate your commission that way. So it's just like I'm saying, this is just like a backstop for somebody who chooses to take that avenue, which I don't think we're going to see a lot of. We'll see it once in a while, and that's how it's going to work. But That's solely what this is for. Okay.
Perfect. Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay. And Marisol again. Here we go. Sorry. Go ahead.
I just wanted to share my experience just to see if it makes it a little bit easier for you guys, but it's very simple, straightforward. And yes, you can always do amendments to whatever you're going to get paid. So I was going to get paid a certain amount. A buyer is an attorney. So I didn't want to be with that liability with no pay. So I had him represent himself. And then I just asked the seller for that extra 1%. Very straightforward. I had him go and look for the purchase contract. I didn't even help him with the purchase contract or anything. And there's very limited information that we can give them. So it's up to them. If they don't think about it, if they don't want to pay an agent, it's on them. If they want to struggle and go through the struggle, and trust me, he struggled. So it's a good thing. It's very easy.
Yep. There you go. From somebody who experienced it. So, pull the curtain back so you guys feel a little bit less confused about the process. That's it. You're like the dealer when they change dealers, right? You submit your offer, or I can even help you with the offer, get the non-agency sign, and you're on your own after that. I have nothing to do with that. Okay, so real quick, let's go back and look at the manufactured home and the probate addendums so that we can, because I know somebody had asked to look at them. I'm not going to fill it out, but all the manufactured home listing addendum is going to have is the space number. If it's in a park, right, which the majority of the ones we're going to sell are going to be in a park. Manufactured home on lease or rented land, space number, the park name, the address, the city, and then the information about the the manufactured home, the manufacturer, the serial numbers, the insignias, that stuff. You need to get that and fill that out. Now, you may not have that in the time when you're doing the listing agreement, so this stuff can be put in when you get to the listing agreement. And what happened to my probate one? Thought I added that too. Did I not? I did. Did it add it? Where is the probate? There we go. The probate listing addendum is just whether or not the property is probate, conservatorship, guardianship, or receivership. The listing period can't be more than 90 days. If there's court confirmation required or may be required, and if information about the listing will not be provided on the MLS. One thing I will remind you guys about probates, if you get probates, the commission, the total commission is limited to 5% on probates. So if you know I have a listing agreement that's a probate and you put in that listing agreement more than 3%, then you know that you can't exceed the total balance of 5 on whatever you negotiate with the buyer's agent, right? So if I have 3% on my listing, the most I can pay a buyer's agent is 2%. If I put 4% in my listing agreement, the most I can pay a buyer's agent is 1%. If I, like some agents I've seen, are able to show the value and negotiate a very high listing, commission, and you put 5% on your listing agreement on a probate, unless you're willing to modify it down, that probate will not allow you to pay any buyer's agent compensation. So keep that in mind with probates. Okay. All right. Moving on. So we're good with the commission part, right? And that's the thing, is I wanted to make sure everybody is good. Let's see. I also had a transaction where my seller was willing to pay 1% for unrepresented buyer. However, buyer wanted representation and willing to pay 1% for a total of 2%. Okay, but that 1%, once that buyer became represented, that 1% that was in the listing agreement didn't count anymore. Any 2% you were going to get would had to have been negotiated based on a BRBC from the buyer and the request in the purchase agreement. So again, this 1% is only counts if the buyer stays unrepresented. Once the buyer decides they need you to represent them and is willing to pay commission, you still have to negotiate the compensation. Okay. And that's fine, but it's still, this 1% is not that agreement. You still have to negotiate it in the purchase agreement. So you have to understand that. I know it seems like it's like a silly delineation to make, is like, well, now they're represented, but you were already going to pay 1% for unrepresented. So you should be, it doesn't matter. Contractually, they could have said, I'm not paying you anything. You should have left them unrepresented. Right. So just understand that that's what it means clearly. And if that buyer chooses then to step into that representation space with you and sign a BRBC or a PSRA, then you've got to do a different process. And yes, it is all negotiable. Everything is negotiable. And that's why I said with Gabby's and Marisol's, where they negotiated that 1%, or Marisol negotiated the 1%. She did it in real life. Gabby asked the question, can we do it as a hypothetical? And we had a real life example of Marisol where after the fact, when a buyer chose not to be represented because they didn't want to pay compensation, they were able to negotiate it after the fact that the seller would do that. Now, she said she did an addendum, not 100% the right way, should have been a modification of terms, but either way, she did what she needed to do. And she even had a buyer non-agency in there because I saw it in her file when we went through it. So she did everything she was supposed to do. She did it the right way, and she was able to obtain that additional compensation. And that's all I want from you guys, is to be able to understand the right ways to do things, because once we understand the right way, like how things are structured, and we do it the right way, then we can move within that, because not everything is black and white. We can move within that area. There is a bit of gray as long as we're doing it legally and we understand the process. So everything, absolutely everything is negotiable. It's just understanding where we're coming from and in this place to make sure it's clear, because if we're not clear with our sellers, they're not going to get it. And when we try to make any changes come later, when it comes to that negotiating period, they're going to be unsure of the negotiations because they're going to feel like that doesn't make sense. I think you told me something different when we signed the listing agreement. I just want you guys to be super clear. Okay. The next section down, which is 2C3, is continuation of right to compensation for broker identified prospective buyers. It sounds very clumsy. All that is if within the period that we put in this section, and I would tell you that probably should be 180 days. If your listing is 6 months, make it 6 months period afterwards. Even if you do the 1 year like I did at the beginning, I would say the majority of us are doing 6 months. Do a 180-day period. And what that means is when this listing, or if this listing were to cancel or expire, you would give a list to the seller of all the people that saw the property or submitted an offer on the property while you had the listing agreement. And if any of those people were to come back within this 180-day period to buy the property, you would then step back in as listing agent because they would still owe you compensation. Okay, it would be that they'd have to pay you and their new listing agent. Their new listing agent would have to step out. You would step back in and now represent them. Okay, that's how that works. Works the exact same way for you as a buyer's agent, right? And it works the same way for you here, especially for those of you that are working with expireds. That's what this next section down is: seller obligation to pay previous brokers. So if I know that I'm going on a listing appointment with an expired listing, I'm going to want to list all the previous brokers they were listed with. And for those of you guys that work with expireds, you know that there are some times where they have been on the market 3 or 4 times with different brokers and expired or canceled. So I want to list everybody. And if I can't, I'm going to put C addendum, and I'm going to put all the brokers on that addendum. And the next section down says compensation to above brokers are owed if property is transferred to. If they provided them a list of the buyers like we just talked about here, then you would have to attach that list to this and say, hey, I step out if those buyers want to buy this property during whatever the period of time was that you had agreed to with your previous broker. Okay. So you would need to see all that. Now, if the seller says, no, I wasn't with anybody, I would just put seller states none. And I would put here, same thing, seller states, I can't spell, states no exceptions. Okay, that's it. Now what happens is this. If I ask the seller this question, the seller tells me no, and now another broker comes in, say, hey, I have this exception list that I gave them, and this is the listing agreement that said for this period of time that they had to compensate me. I can just I can say now, hey, well, the seller lied, so the seller is now the one who's on the hook for the compensation, not that I need to be replaced as broker. Okay, does that make sense? Questions? I think earlier I saw a question about open houses. You would still need this form, the OHNA. If you're doing an open house, have any of the buyers sign it. You'll need multiples. That's it. Okay. Let me go back to the listing agreement. Sorry, I just know I had seen that earlier when we were going through all the compensation stuff. Okay. So we did the compensation. We've handled that. We've handled the continuation. We've handled the exceptions, any of those things. Now we have items included, excluded. So again, just like we do with our purchase agreement, if we're going through with the seller, anything that would normally be a personal item that they want to include in the listing price and the sale, you would put it in here, anything that they would include. Any excluded items, things that would normally be excluded, like, any kind of fixture that they want to exclude, put it in here. Leased items, is there anything? Is there solar powers, alarms, water softener, propane tanks? Is there anything that's leased on the property? Any liens, solar systems, windows or doors, heating, ventilation, any liens on the property based on things that are part of the property, okay? You'd have to put those in here. Smart home features that the seller would like to include or exclude, they would go in here also. Jasmine had a question, so go ahead.
Thanks, Kyle. Kyle, lately a lot of our sellers have solar panels, and I've been looking in the agreements, and they said that it lawfully they're not supposed to be recorded on the prelim, or I mean on the title, property's title. But let's just say seller, buyer doesn't want to assume the loan, then the contract. Is the
Then
seller forced to?
No, it's a contingency on if paragraph 8 of the purchase agreement, it is a contingency. It's a contingency that the buyer can assume the lease or the lien, and if they can't, then they can cancel based on that, but they can't force the seller to pay them off.
So let's just say the buyer doesn't want them and the seller doesn't want to pay them off. Does that loan get I mean, is there a way around that?
No. Either they don't sell the house to those buyers, they pay it off, or the buyers assume it. There's no other choice. Like there's no way around. Like you can't sell to that buyer and not handle the solar panels.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I mean, there's no way around it. It's like any other lien or encumbrance on the property. You either pay it or you don't. And if that buyer doesn't want to pay it, then you move on to another buyer who's willing to.
It's odd because I don't see it on the preliminary report, and I look for the lien.
Not all solar panels are liens. Most of them are leases.
Uh-huh.
So they wouldn't be on the prelim.
Okay. I see.
They're a lease.
You could take those with you then, right? On the new property?
You could, as long as you put I would double check and make sure that the solar company will allow it, because some of them don't allow it. Others charge exorbitant amounts to remove them. The other thing is you have to make sure the roof is back to originally what the roof would have been like without those solar panels. So sometimes the cost of moving them exceeds the cost of either figuring out how to pay it off from the proceeds or waiting on the market so you find a buyer that's willing to take on that lease.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Alba put, if seller does not remember agents' names or does not provide them, do we write seller states no? I would put in there that seller stated that they were listed with previous brokers, but they don't remember who it was. I would put like a C addendum, and I'd write that on an addendum. I'd be clear what this specifically the seller said to you. Okay. Property will be marketed in the following MLS. Your primary MLS for all of us is CRMLS. That's who it's going to market. If you are a member of a second MLS of some kind, then you could put that other MLS in there. But for the majority, it's going to be the CRMLS. The MLSA is a form that we're going to get to later that I wanted to talk to you about for when we're delaying the marketing. Okay. In here, the default for timing of presentation offer is seller instructs broker to present all offers received as soon as possible. But if your seller says, I want to wait till a very specific date, then you can check that box and put that date in. Or certain days after the property is listed. I want the property to be listed on the market for 14 days before we present any offers. You can do that as an instruction from your seller. Okay. Supplemental offer letters. Seller instructs broker not to present buyer letters, right? The love letters that buyers tend to send sometimes with their offers. The default is don't present them to me. Or the seller can check this box. You can explain it to the seller, check this box. And if the seller says, yeah, I'd like to see letters from the buyer's agent. If you do that, it does say at the end, seller is acting against broker's advice. The reason they're saying that is because if you look at the fair housing, it says that even though the letter is trying to talk about how great it would be for them to own the house, some sellers could make a choice still based on the information in that letter to discriminate against somebody based on the information, even if it isn't, specifically stated, what race or color or sexual orientation or any of those things. If they glean that information somehow from the letter, they could still use it as a way to not to sell somebody as a discrimination tactic. But if people want to see the love letters, it's fine. You can do that. Melissa had her hand up. Go ahead.
Kyle, my sellers initially had checked that they don't want to see the letters, and then
that's not a check. If they check, they want to see it.
So they went along with the default that they don't want to see the letters, and then they went and told me that they do want to see the letters. So,
then I would modify the listing agreement so that later on they can't say, well, we didn't want to see them and they showed them to us. I would still do a modification of terms. Any change to what the listing agreement says that they're advising you, do a modification of terms always. Okay. So that's the buyer supplemental letters. Any investigation reports, these are the sellers agreeing to do these within 5 days of the beginning date of the agreement. So if I were you and there is a city pre-sale inspection, I would check off the other and put like City of Southgate pre-sale. And then that way they're agreeing that they're going to get it. Like, this is one of the things that sometimes as listing agents, we don't have conversation with the sellers to say, hey, by the way, seller, you live in Compton, you live in Southgate, you live in Huntington Park, you live in Maywood, you live in Linwood, you live, in hundreds of other cities that require a pre-sale inspection. You're going to have to do that. And especially in some place like the city of Southgate, you're going to have to do that as soon as possible because of the amount of time it takes to get somebody to come do the inspection and to get the report back. Okay. So keep that in mind. Exceptions to ownership and title, if there is any, that they're there. The majority of the time there isn't anything. There could be something that's like an issue, like there's a cloud on title that they're going to disclose to you that could be a condition of their transfer of title. These are seller opt-outs, and I think sometimes the agents don't think and they just start checking boxes, because I've seen a couple listings recently where people have checked these off. And when I'm reviewing the listing, I say, hey, so they don't want a lockbox or a sign? They're like, oh, no, they do. And I said, well, these boxes that you checked means they don't. So just be careful that you're not just getting check happy, because sometimes as agents, we do that. We just start checking blank boxes, right? We just start checking. Okay. So this is all really the negotiation part. That's it. All these other paragraphs that come after are all explanations of the things that we've already went through. And I've already went through those explanations with you. So any addendum that you're going to include, like an REO advisory listing, which the majority of you guys, 99.9%, aren't you going to do that, because REO listings are specific to REO agents that have accounts with them. But you could have a short sale. So if this is a short sale listing, you want to include the short sale information advisory. Nothing to fill out. It just kind of gives you the basic ideas of the short sale and what happens. A trust advisory, you want to put that in if the sale of this property is in a trust and it's being sold by the successor trustee. Okay. Any addenda, like, so we said before, see addendum. If you add them on here, right, it'd be addendum 1 and 2, addendum 1, or any other things that may have been added. Okay. We're going to go down here real quick. We're going to skip over all of this because we've already gone through all of those explanations. And we're going to talk about here about the mediation, the same as in the purchase agreement, that you have to go through mediation before you can go to litigation or arbitration, unless it's subject to small claims or anything like that. Okay. We're going to skip through. So in this case, like this one is the Smith Family Irrevocable Trust. This is an entity seller. If it's a trust, you're going to put the full name of the trust there. If it's a probate, you're going to put the full entity name there. When you put a probate, you're going to put a case number there. If this is a corporation, you're going to put the full name of the corporation. But in this case, this is the John Smith Family Irrevocable Trust. Right? That's what that, wow, man, I was horrible with my typing today. Worse than usual. I'm going to put that. And then here, I'm going to put who are the signers on behalf of that. So in this case, let's say it's Jerry Smith, because he's the successor trustee. So he's going to be signing. Guess what it's going to do? It's going to add him there. And then I'm going to put his title in there. And then Jerry Smith is going to sign his name on the John Smith Family Irrevocable Trust as the seller. Okay. That's how we're going to do it. If there's more than one, you're going to put them in there. If there is more than one agent from the same office, if there are 4, then you're going to do additional signature addendums. Always additional signature addendums when you don't have enough space for signatures. More than one agent from the same office, you're going to check that, and it's going to include the form, the additional agent acknowledgement. And then if this is a co-list with an outside broker, you're going to check that box, and you're going to get the additional broker acknowledgement. Okay. What is the best way to find out if we need a city inspection? There is a list on All Stars Connect for those of you guys that are working for All Stars and your All Stars Connect intranet. You can go into the library. There is a list of cities that require pre-sale inspections. For those of you guys that don't work here and you're watching this video later, you'd have to check with the city to make sure there isn't one that's required for your listing. So real quick, so we can finish up, I want to look at the MLSA. So this multiple listing service addendum kind of explains how the multiple listing service works, what you're able to advertise and what you're not, what the exposure through the MLS still means, still the benefits of still being able to advertise to all of the buyer's agents that are out there and see the property, the exposure, and all those things, and what that means when it also gets syndicated out to other areas. But the one thing that we want to talk about, because this is where the piece gets missed, because agents take listings, and I see it all the time, they take a listing and they either don't register it, they register it, where they're keeping it off the market for a specific amount of time, or they don't do anything with it, they just kind of hold on to it until they're ready to make it active. Okay. The proper steps, if I am not going to make the listing coming soon or active on the MLS, the status of coming soon or status active on the MLS within 2 days of taking the listing, then I have to fill out this section, paragraph 3D of the MLSA that says seller instructs broker to exclude the property from dissemination by the MLS. The MLS may require a form of its own or this MLSA to be submitted. Seller understands that no public marketing will occur, and the scope of marketing that will occur will consist of only direct one-on-one promotion between the brokers and licensees affiliated with the listing brokerage and their respective clients while the property is excluded. Seller understands the impact of opting out of the MLS in paragraph 2B, and seller certifies and instructs broker to begin marketing to the property to the public, including through the MLS, on a specific date or not at all. Okay. So you have to do this if you're going to hold it out of the MLS for any period of time. And somebody put, is registered the same as incomplete? No, registered is a separate setting. Like you have a status of coming soon, status of active under contract. Registered is a step prior to that, where you put the property address in, you put the listing agent in, you can put a start marketing date if you want, but it's to prove to the MLS that even though it was held out of the MLS for public marketing, you still showed proof that you had taken that listing within a certain period of time. So no, incomplete is not registered. Registered is a whole separate thing. And as a matter of fact, for those of you to register your listings, if you don't have our listing coordinator do it, you have to do it on that dashboard where you log in. It's not done on the CRMLS matrix. Okay, so if you have questions about that later, you can either ask our listing coordinator or ask me. I don't want to get into that right now because that's not really a contract thing. All properties fall under the clear cooperation policy, so you don't have to you're never going to check that box. But if you are holding it out for any period of time, so let's say I'm taking this listing today on the 3rd, I want to hold it out for 2 weeks, so I'm going to start marketing on the 17th. Tomorrow or the next day, I would register it in the MLS. And then on the 17th, I would either make it coming soon or active. Okay. And that's it. That's what you have to do if you're not going to put the property in the MLS immediately. All right. Questions about anything? I know we went a little bit longer than normal, but I wanted to make sure we finished the RLA and the MLSA so that you guys are going out there and you're prepared. Any other questions? No? All right, perfect. Thank you guys. If you need me for anything, you can always email me. You can call me. I'm here. I'll always answer your questions. This will be, hold on. Jesus has something he wants to say before we go. Go ahead, Jesus.
Really quick, can we, I know we're part of the CRMLS, can we, if the seller wants not to promote it for the first 2 weeks, can we host open houses and not promoting the CRMLS?
No.
Thank you.
No. You can do nothing. Once it's registered, if you have this exclusion done that we just talked about on the MLSA, you can't do anything with it. You can't put a sign. You can't put it on your social media. You can't cold call. You can't door knock. You can't do an open house. The only thing you can do is promote it within your office and with any client that has signed a disclosure regarding agency relationships or a BRBC in the last year.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. No other questions. All right. I'm not sure what we're talking about again next Thursday. Again, this will be on YouTube later on. So if you missed any part of it and you want to go see it on YouTube, go for it. Other than that, thank you guys for being here. I really appreciate it. Have a great day. Be safe and productive. See you soon.